Hi guys, it's Omer from MMOs.com doing another quick weekly news recap of all major MMO news and announcements for the week ending September 11th, 2017. This is episode number 1112 of the recap, and before we begin, I do want to say that there will be no podcast tomorrow since my brother and I will be traveling, but we'll resume podcasts and everything else next week. Anyway, the first bit of news this week is from Activision Blizzard, and as all of you are already probably aware, Destiny 2 launched this last week, but only on consoles, and even so, it's off to an amazing start. According to Bungie, the game already hit over 1.2 million concurrent users, and by the time the PC release rolls around sometime in October, that number should increase quite a bit. Just to give you some context, that's actually more than any game on Steam at the moment, so it's already off to a phenomenal start. The game will be getting a new DLC in December as well, called Curse of Osiris, which will further expand the game's content. Personally, I'm looking forward to playing Destiny 2, but on the PC when it launches sometime in October. I believe October 24th is the aim date, and I'll be waiting for that. Anyways, moving past Destiny, old school RuneScape / 2000scape just launched an exclusive update called Fossil Island this last week, which adds a plethora of new zones, new adventures, and bug fixes. To even access Fossil Island, players need 100 kudos, and to access the new volcanic mine, they need 180 kudos and 50 mining. While we talk a lot about new launches on this weekly series, these older games like RuneScape, Tibia, and MapleStory remain incredibly popular, and I suspect they'll continue to be hugely successful for the years to come. Plus, it's really cool to see Jagex still updating old school RuneScape as well. Next up, a bit of fun news. A brand new documentary called Dad of Light launched on Netflix this last week, which chronicles the story of a father and son bonding over Final Fantasy XIV. Reviews are pretty good so far, and it's been called a heartwarming tale. It's a Japanese drama series with English subtitles, and what makes it interesting though to me is that it's actually based on a true story. And while I haven't seen it just yet, I do plan to because I've seen a lot of documentaries / series based on MMOs, and this sounds pretty interesting. Up next, we have a new free-to-play game that was just announced this last week called Magic the Gathering Arena from Wizards of the Coast, and as you probably already guessed, it's yet another attempt to bring the incredibly successful physical card game online. What makes this story a bit odd is that there's already Magic the Gathering Online and Magic Duels, which are essentially the same games already. Magic the Gathering Arena, though, is being developed in-house by Wizards of the Coast, so I guess it's a bit different in that regard and will probably be a bit more polished experience. Given Hearthstone's staggering success, it made about $400 million last year, it should be no surprise to see everyone trying to make digital card games. You got that Dota game coming out as well, yet another card game, but we'll see how this one does. Next up, shared world action RPG Secret World Legends released update 2.11 this last week called the Raid Update. It introduced the new Manhattan Exclusion Zone raid, which is aimed at level 50 players, where they can take on giant enemies called lurkers. If that isn't enough though, players can also now challenge lair mega bosses, which are 40-person raid monsters that can be summoned using items dropped from regional lair bosses. Oh man, 40-player raids sounds awesome. Since Secret World Legends launched, it's been doing quite well actually. Average concurrent players on Steam alone over the last 30 days have been over 1,500, and with many more of those players playing actually off of Steam. The game seems to be doing well. Up next, a bit of news on the esports department. Blizzard is tired of playing third fiddle to Riot Games and Valve in the esports spotlight, so they announced a brand new state-of-the-art esports arena called the Blizzard Arena in Los Angeles to use as a venue for all of their games. People can already purchase tickets for the Overwatch Season 1 playoffs and the Hearthstone Championship Tour, as well as other games. We'll be seeing some Heroes of the Storm and World of Warcraft Arena there as well, I'm sure. And given everything we're seeing, it's clear to me that Blizzard is starting to take esports super seriously, as is everybody else. And speaking of Blizzard, World of Warcraft patch 7.3 launched this last week, which introduced new content, a lot of PvP changes, and some bug fixes. Probably the biggest PvP changes include changes to dodge chance. It's been further reduced from 20% to 30%. And other PvP highlights include nerfs to Feral Druids and Death Knights. Other classes also received minor tweaks, but they were pretty small. Blizzard also pointed out this week that Argus, the final zone in World of Warcraft Legion, will be a no-fly zone, mainly to maintain the game's challenging atmosphere in that area. Plus, they want to encourage exploration and more. While it probably goes without saying, World of Warcraft is still the most successful MMORPG here in the West. Not in the entire world though, their Dungeon Fighter Online is a bit bigger. Next up, Mirage Arcane Warfare, the buy-to-play action game for the makers of Chivalry Medieval Warfare, took an interesting step this last week to revitalize their dying game. Mirage, for you guys that don't know, is basically just Chivalry with different characters, spells, and abilities. The game made itself free to play for one day, so whoever actually downloaded it on September 6th could keep the game forever and play it. This worked remarkably well because the game's player base jumped to 42,000 concurrent users that day. But as many of you probably already guessed, that number has already come crashing down since. The game is still averaging about 1,300 or so users online, which is still not bad, but I feel like that number will only continue to decrease. In my opinion, they should have just made the game permanently free to play, and honestly though, I think Chivalry is just a more fun game overall. Next up, the previously announced Homecoming update for WildStar officially launched this last week, which introduced new Prime content, communities, and residential innovations to the game. The most interesting aspect of the update for me seems to be the game's new Community Showdown event, which is a competition for seasoned architects, landscapers, and interior designers to make the most beautiful house possible with 5 conjoined housing plots. The winning team will receive $2,500, so the stakes are pretty large. I absolutely love this concept for an event, and I think other games with highly detailed player housing should consider running something similar as well. Even though I don't play WildStar, I am eager to see what the winning design comes up with. Should be pretty cool. Next up, a small bit of news for those in Southeast Asia. Dragon's Nest will be shutting down in the region for a short while and then relaunching as Identity Games as its new publisher. For those unaware, Identity is the game's original developer and is actually the same guys that published the game here in the West as well. Personally though, I prefer to see the game run on one mega server with different regional channels that players can switch between freely. Actually, I like to see that model being used in any MMORPG or online game. That makes a lot more sense. Next up, an indie game called Tale of Toast officially launched into alpha this last week as well. It's a pretty hardcore old school MMORPG made by somebody that clearly loves MMOs. And again, despite the game's look, it is actually quite hardcore. It has open world PvP and actually full loot as well. And the game's been pretty well received by the hardcore community so far, but again, it's an indie game, so I don't expect it to be too big, but I expect a first look for this one relatively soon. Oh, and it's worth mentioning that the game is free to play. The next and last bit of news this week comes from Elder Scrolls Online. The game's Update 16, Clockwork City, will be launching as the next DLC update. The Clockwork City was in Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind and will be making its debut in the MMO for the first time. Logically, after the Morrowind expansion too, so it all makes sense. And as with all ESO updates, ESO Plus members will get the DLC for free, and for the others, it'll be available in the game's Crown Store. Update 16 also includes balance changes, performance improvements, and Xbox One X support. Anyway guys, that's it for MMO news this week. I know we don't have too much this week to cover, but next week we should have more stuff. I remember no podcast tomorrow, but I'll see you guys sometime next week. Later guys.